where your host, nationally recognized certified appraiser Elizabeth Stewart, Santa Barbara's treasure sleuth, will help you put a value on the treasures in your own home.
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven?
So let's find out.
2,
How
1.
valuable is
You're
it?
live.
Hello, Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. And Richard, I've got a show today about wrapping up the last year and launching into the new year, 2024. And I think one of the most important things in the art world that has happened is that thousands of works that were copyrighted in 1928 entered the public domain on January 1st, 2024.
Wow. Oh, by the way, you want to go into 2024? I don't want to go. Last year's calendar went up in smoke in September because we were moving so fast. And here we are. It's already the 5th of January in the new year. Elizabeth, good grief. All right. So talk to us about some of these artworks and so forth. And by the way, does this include maybe even, I don't know, do you copyright musical scores and things of that nature? Or is it just like
Right.
art that goes on
Yes.
the wall or the table and so forth? Maybe define them.
No, it's works of culture, works of art of all kinds. And so what happens is it's the stages of copyright. And so now what happens is, let's take for example an icon. Let's take Mickey Mouse.
Ah,
And
yes.
Mickey Mouse is also trending in memes, and not all of them pleasant. So Disney's Mouse and other works that were copyrighted in 1929 entered the public domain. What does that mean? Well, the public domain means that it's ideally a character image that has been launched into the public domain from the area of copyright. That public domain character is now a jumping off point to further creative expression and elaboration. It provides, let's say, in the case of Mickey Mouse, it provides someone who's creative to work with that character to use the inspiration and raw material of that character to create something new. And now, this has got good and bad sides, Richard.
Basically, as everything does.
Yeah, because Mickey Mouse and other works that were copyrighted in 1929, the mouse can now say and do any number of unpleasant, horrible, snarky things. And of course, social media is awash with such things as a killer version of Steamboat Willie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like we said, that's not what public domain was meant to be. It wasn't meant to be the starting off point for horrible things. It was meant to be a starting off point for creativity. Now you might say, well, okay, but it's all the same. Who is the judge of what's horrible, what's not? So let's see. There's other, for example, other stories. For example, like A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh last year. It can now also was also we saw depicted doing and saying any number of horrible things. It's an interesting thing that you bring up. Is it all artworks? Is it all forms of creativity? When copyright is over, when the copyright period is over, then yes, the work of art enters the public domain. And there's a fine line, a legal fine line, but this is a really interesting thing with Mickey Mouse because he's so famous all over the world. And also the other fun thing about this particular story is that Disney fought tooth and nail to expand the legalities around public domain in the case of Mickey. So let's talk a little bit about some other really interesting features in the art world. Who else has entered the public domain, Richard? Works by M.C. Escher Escher is the famous artist for like the lights and the darks and the shapes, and all of a sudden they create something like a flock of birds. I'm thinking of that in particular. Works by Andre Breton entered the public domain. It's quite fascinating what people can do with those images. Already people are doing kind of Escher-esque knockoffs. And like you say, we're only 5 days into the new year. But yeah, um, can we talk a little bit about uh, other artworks that have entered the public domain? There's a bounty of art-related material. Um, so let's talk a little bit about surrealism, because we mentioned Andre Breton. This is an author whose novel Nadja has entered the public domain. M.C. Escher, his print The Tower of Babel, so also joined the public domain. Francis Picabia, a really interesting artist from the 1920s as well, abstract artist. Georgia O'Keeffe has entered the public domain. Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, and there's been a number of AI takeoffs. We talk about public domain. Well, how much is AI going to become involved with the reshaping some of these images? Well, the case of Edward Hopper, quite a bit. There's been a lot of AI generated new Nighthawks, for example. That's the image of those people in the corner diner in the middle of the night. Very evocative. Let's talk a little bit about some other fun stuff. Crime Blotter. Pennsylvania city of Scranton is not a destination for many art lovers, but it's a site of a significant art heist that took place in 2025. Now, why that matters today is because 4 pleaded guilty to the crime in 2023, returning works by Andy Warhol, Jackson Pollock, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as of last week, a gentleman came up and pleaded guilty, surrendering himself and returning more works of art, which is really interesting because they are a group of thieves that have targeted various smaller museums and manor houses, architecturally significant places that are open to the public in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Not the big museums, but the small ones. So that's very interesting. They've been on the run for almost 20 years for various art thefts in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. How cool is
So I'm curious, if someone was to steal something that was obviously prior to that 1920s date or year, does that mean that they can duplicate it without fear of copyright infringement?
so
Because you know
once
people
it-
doing that all the time.
Yeah, once it enters the public domain, it can be used to be a part of a new creation, but it can't, in my understanding, it can't be used to make a total duplicate.
So you can't forge. You cannot forge it. You can't create
right.
a
So it's got to
yeah.
be a jumping off point for a new creation. So, it wouldn't be a total copy of what people were looking at
Okay.
in the original, but it would be, it would be a rethink, a re-elaboration, a
Yeah.
reinvention, something like this.
Right. Because you know about the one guy, the one artist, and again, these people are very talented and in their own right. Who they did a 60 Minutes piece on him, I think, where he basically got caught basically forging or duplicating various incredible works of art. And now I guess he now helps the art world to find forgeries. It's very interesting. We need to take a short little break here on this very first program for you here in 2024. So if you want to kind of give us a clue as to what we're going to look at in the next segment.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about where certain people were in the art world when New Year's Eve struck. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Art World Insider's predictions for 2024 in the art and collectible arena. Some of the great museum directors have weighed in on what the world's going to look like. And then we're going to talk a little bit about those folks and some really interesting movements in the world of museums, both here and in Europe.
All right. Well, we'll go to break and we'll be back. Okay, we're clear. By the way, we had so many glitches this past week or two. They finally changed the modem here. So far since last night when I tuned in at home on my streamer, I have had no interruptions in the stream. So far so good. So we shouldn't have any problems here during your program again, losing you.
That's fantastic.
Very frustrating, but yes, fantastic.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, you know, a little rocky on Wednesday when we pre-recorded. So yeah, I'm glad that got, is that because of the new owners? Are they?
No. That's something that's been happening for the last couple of years. We've never been able to define exactly what it is, but every time they change out the modem, the signal is consistent for a few weeks to a month. And then it's like these modems just, they don't last long at all. They're doing a little piece on Profile America about how America had a great influence on the varieties of teas. Yes, including harbor tea. Very delicious. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. This is the first program for me of 2024, and I'm talking a little bit about some of the expert opinions about what's going to happen in the art world coming up. And one of the Art World Insider's predictions for 2024, now that the Venice Biennale returns this spring, and there's a full slate of art fairs. The Endeavor owned Frieze and the MCH Group, which owns Art Basel. They're going to have an incredible packed calendar for 2024. And, you know, all this seclusion and the stopping of these fairs during the pandemic, that is all over, and it's just all exploding. So there's a lot of really amazing things happening at some of the auction houses. Noted Christie's and Sotheby's, and Phillips is an auction house that may not be around after this year because of the domination of the big auction houses from Christie's and Sotheby's. Let's talk a little bit about some of the art, the big names in the art world, what they're saying is going to go on this 2024. Well, the urgency to own art will not feel quite as urgent, apparently, says Alan Schwartzman, who is an art advisor in New York. He's going to expect a lot of volatility in the art market. You know, Christie's and Sotheby's, we talked a little bit about the kind of numbers that they were generating. The total income that Christie's and Sotheby's generated this year is $14.2 billion with a B. And Schwartzman is saying that this will not continue. New businesses should be created to develop a sustainable secondary market. I agree with that. And what he means by that is the works of art that are not, you know, masterpieces, where do they go to be sold. A lot of the auction houses are refusing the lesser value art right now because why would they? If they can sell something that's hugely valuable, why would they work on something smaller? So let's see, who else is weighing in on this? 2023 saw the art market correction we had expected for years, says Alex Glauber, art advisor and president of the Association of Art Advisors. He says that there's greater cause for optimism in 2024 because the Federal Reserve has indicated it will cut rates at least once a year and likely more.
Can you explain the connection between that last element and how that impacts this whole thing? On what do people finance their purchases, their auction purchases? I thought you had to have cash.
Well, first of all, you don't always have to have cash. You can finance auction purchases, yes, and you could go in with a consortium of other buyers. These are fairly new things in the auction world, those factors I'm mentioning. But when interest rates are high, people tend not to buy art because they're involved in other investments. For example, they may be looking at a new property, for example, and if the interest rates are high, they cut back typically on stuff that isn't necessary. Art is not necessary. You can't eat it, you can't sleep on it. So basically, the art gets cut back when the interest rates get high. So this particular advisor is saying there's cause for optimism in 2024 as far as collectors are concerned because the Federal Reserve has indicated it'll cut rates once a year, and at least once a year. So that's, when the tide rises, what do they say, Richard? The tide floats all boats. So if the interest rates are lower, it seems like there's more money to go around. And so therefore people do buy luxury items like art, for example. So much of the primary art market, for example, in the Sotheby's, the Christie's, the high-end galleries, for example, that has become beholden to these art fairs. And the art fairs, if you have never been, an art fair is so unusual, so vibrant. And we're talking, for example, Art Basel in Miami. It's just, I've been a couple of times, it's just amazing. The clothes that you see, the works of art that you see, the celebrities that show up, the purchasing power of the art world. It's a little bit crazy and obscene, really, but it's amazing to see. And the art fairs are becoming an important part of the art market. Even the low level art fairs, the fairs, for example, all over the world where people have their own art association. For example, our Santa Barbara Art Association, the Galena Valley Art Association, they do some incredible shows, maybe for art for $100 or less, and they do a really good job with that. And so these public events around art are becoming a really important part of the art world.
Art at rock bottom prices.
Well, usually the works for less than $100. They're smaller, they're not less complicated, but this also fits a niche market. It fits the starter and the beginner market, for example, and it also fits the more modest purchaser because if you don't have the wall space, you don't need a 6 by 6 foot canvas. So this is a real trend, and we're going to see that continuing. And what various experts are saying is, let's think of more ways that we can create events around art, because the polarization between the gallery world and the auction world is really strong today. And it puts a lot of pressure on galleries already operating on tight margins. So I think that there's going to be real opportunities for creative thinking about how an art club or a gallery or even a dealer, how a person can encourage people to join in an event at the gallery, for example, or at the sales room. Then we have a lot of the strife that the world's going through, which also affects the art market in general, the geopolitical unrest, the forthcoming presidential election, cultural divisions that are so incredible today. There's probably going to be a lot of consolidation between what the art world is doing as far as selling art and the event around art. That's what a lot of people are saying about 2024. So let's see. The market will continue to discover artists from historically marginalized or underrepresented groups. They're going to give them new exhibition platforms and new market momentum, new shows, new, like I said, new events. You're going to hear a lot of interest in female artists, indigenous artists, um, new mediums. For example, weavers and sculptors are going to become really important in the art market. The chairman of Sotheby's says in 2022, we're going to see continued price separation, as we were talking about, between the best and the rest when it comes to the quality of the work and also the sales points, this price points. We're going to see a demand for greater range of artists. Chicano artists in particular, he predicts. Women artists will continue to move to the top end. And he mentions that sales of female contemporary artists are going to be really important in the art world, for example. And where is the action going to take place? Well, president of Pace Gallery, Mark Glimcher, says that Japan is emerging as a important global art world hotspot.
Now, can I ask you a question about that in that regard? Is it because of modern day Japanese artists, or is it because of a lot of the, I'll use the term ancient artwork that is still out there?
Well, you bring up a really interesting point. What they're talking about, you're thinking of in terms of geographical location determines what they're selling. And that used to be the case. So you'd have British art selling in London, you'd have American art selling in New York, you'd have Japanese art selling in Tokyo. This isn't the world now. The world is so international. So when we say that Tokyo is a must-go destination for any kind of art, it's anything, any culture could be represented very well because Tokyo's become an economic hotspot. And so, we're not talking about just Japanese art or just Asian art. Indeed, absolutely not. We're talking about a global world hotspot that Tokyo is starting to become what New York is now. And could well take over New York business, for example. Richard's giving me a quick signal. We got to go to break. Let's talk a little bit more about what, if you're an artist in Santa Barbara, what to look forward to in 2024, according to the general economic predictions of these great curators that we're talking about here. Will there be a room for the artist that is, for example, what we call an emerging artist, somebody who is not represented at the auction level or at the gallery level? Will there be room for that? I think absolutely, and more so. And I'll give you my reasons when we get back from the break. Don't turn that dial. Back in a minute. We're looking at 2024 in the art world, in the art market, what experts are saying, what people are going to look forward to, and what people are going to be dreading. Don't turn that down.
All right, you're clear. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. We're talking about the art world and what the artists, our local artists, for example, can look forward to based on some of the predictions by the great experts in the art world, president of and CEO of Sotheby's, for example, some of the great curators of great museums. And Richard, you asked a really interesting thing about a hot spot. So, you know, we were talking about Tokyo as being the next New York as far as the art world is concerned, all the activity that's happening or starting to happen there. And we also talked a little bit about the importance of the piggyback event. So an art fair, selling of art or class, an event around art, a lecture in a gallery, you know, things that are happening in our museum is so vital in making the public welcome in various events around the museum, around the art world. And now some of the great museums of the world are getting into this in terms of food. And I think this is a
Food?
really cool movement. Yeah. So
Wow.
let's talk about the Whitney in New York, Whitney Museum. They purchased a restaurant that was kind of close to them. It was Danny Meyer's Untitled was the name of the restaurant. They have renamed it the Frenchette Bakery, and they're serving food. I mean, the museum is now involved and owns a restaurant. And some, if you go to New York, for example, and you want to see what's on at the museum, you
Mhm.
can actually treat yourself to some warm black radish vichyssoise,
Vichy
a
soir. Oh.
vichyssoise, a
Mm.
tart flambe, a mushroom and taglia. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Taggio pizza,
Hmm.
roast beef sandwiches, omelets, rotisserie chicken, salad, duck confit with farro, etc. The menu is fantastic, and this is
Wow.
something that the museums are starting to think about. Okay, let's do food as an art form too.
Now,
I
I
think
would think that they're going to do whatever is necessary to make sure that the artwork is well protected because you you've got food and what if somebody spills or throws food and get a food fight.
well, see, in the case of the Whitney, they bought a restaurant that was very close in their neighborhood, so it's a separate location from the
Oh,
actual
I see.
galleries.
Okay.
But my point is that museums are thinking of outside. Indeed, our Santa Barbara Museum of Art has done that consistently through the years, thinking outside the box of what it means to show art to the public. How do you involve the public in many ways? I want to switch gears, Richard, because some of the resolutions, you know, we have New Year's resolutions. Some of the resolutions I was hearing from my friends in the art world in Santa Barbara revolved around kind of a sweet regret that we are so out of the pandemic that time for seclusion and thought and self reflection and self care that we had the opportunity to do, albeit it wasn't all that much fun for some of us. But for some artists in our community, the frenetic re-entry of the world is a little bit of a problem, and I'm hearing that. I wonder if you feel the same sometimes, you know, because I know you're an author and you are a creative person. A
Uh,
lot of people are, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
A lot of people have said to me, I want to know now that we're back in this fast-paced world again, uh, how, what are some clues? What are some keys to overcoming creative block?
Hmm.
That's a big one. Yeah. And so I thought I'd ask a few artists around town to tell me how they overcome creative block. What do you do, Richard? How do you overcome when you feel stymied?
Um, I would say that I find something else, so to speak, something else to do, to take my mind, I think I take a pause if I get stuck somewhere, and that happens. It really does. It's like that lightning bolt hitting the top of the Empire State Building is missing. It's not on target, and as you've described, creativity, and yeah, I find something else to do. It's kind of like I'll put it this way: it's kind of like the equivalent of I walked into this room, but I can't remember what it was I came in here for. Okay, so what's next on my list? And then
Right.
it'll come back to me and I'll go back into them. Oh, that's right. I was looking for this.
Right. So, one of the most frustrating struggles of the creative life in general is not knowing what to do when things are just not clicking. And so here's some suggestions. Um, there's a deck of cards called Oblique Strategies. It's oracle cards that are meant to guide you through creative ruts. The prompts are poetic. Like, for example, you'll turn over a card, and these cards really exist, and an artist friend of mine swears by them. These prompts are poetic, like repetition is a form of change. Or one card might say, ask your body. Or one card may say, when is it? When is it? When is it? It's a deck of cards, a really helpful bunch of sayings. One says, go to an extreme, move back to a more comfortable place. Well, when my artist friend found this card, randomly chosen from the deck called Oblique Strategies, she went to the studio and started to create a very large painting. And then when she struggled with that, she felt really comfortable about getting back to the painting she was working on, which was much smaller. So it's a deck of clues, of cards, inspiration in sort of strategic, poetic ways. This Oblique Strategies is one particular artist. Um, Another artist said to me, I try to go as far away as possible, literally, geographically, from where I am when I'm in that rut. And I try to throw myself into the most unpredictable environment. Um, and so this particular artist is a real hiker. And she says she loves to go to the most rugged terrain possible and really get into the natural processes of Earth. And when she feels that creative block, she puts herself into the actual process of how the Earth creates and gets through chaos. I think that's genius. Um, Another artist friend of mine says, well, about a creative block. If I'm feeling a creative block, I take a day off, I stay home. Sometimes I get stuck, I get depressed from painting, for example, from writing, from any kind of creative endeavor. I look at old master paintings and I stay at home and I stay and look at a wonderful movie or a book. I get outside of my head. Um, Another artist said to me, we're talking about resolutions. I make a New Year's resolution to approach being stuck or having an artist block with a couple of clues. Um, this is an interesting question because this friend of mine said to me, look, I never feel stuck because doubt drives my work. Um, Stuck implies that you know where it is you want to go and you've been temporarily waylaid, but I use that time to get into the new discoveries around creativity, what words may say, what a new medium might say. Um, I never really think, well, okay, that's it. I know I want to direct the ship because the ship is directing me. And so I don't have that depression and frustration around creative block. I think that's also another kind of genius thought process. A lot of it is getting outside of your own head, I think. Um, Adversity is wealth, for example, he said. You don't need to get rid of the feeling of you're struggling with being a creative person, a creative individual. It's one of the sources of energy is that, okay, come on, can you get through this? And yes, you will. Um, let's see, I've got another quote from another friend of mine. When I feel stuck, I have a very small circle of close friends I talk to, and I work through a project with them. I use them as sounding boards for my writing, for example. And I make a pact with them that if I can speak to them and they're bouncing around with me about an idea, I make myself available to help them. Um, what kind of questions do I ask my friends, this circle of friends that are also creative individuals? Well, I ask them, be honest with me. I reach out and I ask questions like, does this make sense? Is this concept getting across? How can I improve this work, for example, a particular piece of work? How do I improve? And sometimes what they're saying is so opposite of what I'm feeling. I know my direction, for example. Um, you know, many people that are creative individuals, it's been my experience, Richard, that they they need to hear, they need to see. And instead of being at work, for example, writing or creating or painting or sculpting or weaving or drawing, etc., one friend of mine says, I just go out and look. I sit. Um, I sit and I maybe I sit in the gallery, for example, or I take a hike, or I go see other art. It's better than sitting in the studio and thinking, why can't I create today? Go out and see other folks' work, and maybe you become inspired. Maybe you become so depressed that they're working and you're not. But the point is, get outside of yourself. Um, Sometimes you get hit by divine inspiration. It becomes very straightforward, and sometimes you know what you're doing, and and this is part of the creative endeavor, as you're saying, the lightning strike.
Mhm.
You know, then once the lightning say fizzles out, what do you do? Well, you take and you get into the actual process is what advice from another friend of mine. When I feel stuck, I also treat myself to my favorite food. Is another comment I got. I treat myself to a favorite type of food. And that's my ritual. When I taste that, I know that I'm on the path to stopping the stuckness. I love that. Richard, are you telling me we got to go to quick break?
Yes, I am.
Okay. We'll go to a quick break. Don't turn that down. We're talking about, well, two things happenings in the art world, predictions for 2024. We're also talking about my poll of our local artist community in Carpinteria, in Santa Barbara, in Goleta. And we're talking about some of the resolutions I was hearing um, through the various channels, how I'm going to create in 2024 from my local artist friends. A lot of the resolutions revolved around getting unstuck and just discussing with you some of the quotes that I gathered this past week about some of the resolutions I heard, how to approach unstuckedness, if there's a word like that. Don't turn that down. Back in a minute.
All right, you're clear. All right, you got 10 minutes on this one to the end of the show. In three, two, one, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and we're talking about some of the interesting resolutions, New Year's resolutions that I was hearing from my artist friends, visual artists, writers, creative people all through Santa Barbara and Goleta and Carpinteria. Been doing this show about 15 years now, and I've got a great network of artists and performers and people who have, you know, authored books. I've got this wonderful network from this show, and I put out a call asking, what do you do when you are faced with what they call an artist block, creative block? Does it even exist for you? And what's the remedy for that? What do you do? And what would your resolution be about that for this coming year? So, another comment from another friend of mine said, I give myself a break. I watch TV. I read. If I'm prepping for a show, for example, I'm a painter, and it feels really heavy, I stop. Um, I I I take a break from thinking about it. Um, read a book. Uh, Read a book where somebody's actually soothing themselves in a way that you're trying to do. Maybe you want to read this way to kind of significantly, you're speaking to a friend by reading this way. And of course, reach out to friends, for example, is another really important clue. Um, when I feel stuck, I make circles. I close my eyes, says another friend of mine, and as slowly as I can, I make circles. I with ink, circles after circles. Um, you know, that's really interesting that this friend just makes circles, and it's a practice called Enso in Zen Buddhism. I don't think she knows this, but perhaps it's these circles made over and over, over and over. What happens with these circles is that she ends up not looking at the drawing because her hand is automatically making these circles. I leave notes below each circle that I like, and I kind of play a game with it. Um, this is a great remedy. Another friend of mine says I garden. I go out and get my hands dirty. And I don't spend a lot of time out in the garden. I just get my hands dirty. Um, and I look at you know the world through my garden. All of a sudden, I'm seeing differently. That's some of the ideas that some of my creative friends have brought to me about New Year's resolutions regarding creative block. We've never really talked about that on the show, but it exists for many people. And those are some clues. Now, I'd like to get back to a couple of stories in the art world. Um, I think that we're going to see some real influence from the female artists of the world. I think that with wars and unhoused people, um, the various reproductive rights curtailed, some of the upcoming elections happening, where females are very in touch with what's happening in 2024. I think that this will be the year of the female artist. I also think it's going to be a year where there's more equity for artists of color and Native artists. Um, when you say, well, okay, Elizabeth, what do you mean equity for female artists? Well, only 11% of all museum acquisitions in 2022 and 23 were sales by female artists. It's not a lot. 11%. So if your museum is purchasing, are they purchasing works by female artists? No, 11% of the time, yes, maybe. But maybe this trend will continue and the market will continue to be interested in female artists. We're seeing a lot of growth in acquisition of female artists in private collections. And I think that's going to be real interesting to follow. There's going to be continued interest in artists of color and indigenous artists, I predict. And I think that we've got, for example, indications that indigenous art is going to be a real interesting topic. When we look at, for example, a show this past year's called The Land Carries Our Ancestors at the National Gallery of Art. And then another Native artist, female, Jane Quick to see Smith at the Whitney Museum, for example. These are bellwethers, trends happening. Also, I think we're going to see a lot of people that don't stick with one area of creativity. I think we're going to see artists that work across the board and do things like, for example, paint and draw and sculpt and weave, for example, not just focusing on one particular area. And likewise, I think we're going to see collectors collecting across the board and not just sticking with one artist or one type of medium, for example. I only collect, for example, bronze sculptures. No, I think we're going to see people that are going to be what we call cross-category collecting. I think collectors are going to start looking at the very interesting world of how one object can speak to another object. And they're going to build maybe like we used to call it Wunderkabinet. It's a cabinet of curiosities. And that goes back to the 17th century, where people are kind of piggybacking one thing on another, one object on another, and the objects are going to speak to each other. I think we're going to see also an international, we're talking about Tokyo being a great area for economic art endeavors. I think we're going to see a lot of interest in Hong Kong and Tokyo, and I think we're going to see Asian art and music and cinema continue its momentum. And I think we're going to see a positioning of the Chinese market in the global market as well. I really think that's going to be important. I think the framing of international being synonymous with European and American will be different in this coming year. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's just a little bit overview of what the experts are saying about the art market coming up in 2024, and also what local artists are saying about how they want to create in 2024. And I think it'll be a great year for creativity in general because, like we said, where there's adversity, there's opportunity. Thanks, Richard.
All right, you're clear. There you go. Thank you very much. Good program.
Good. Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.